Hey, Firebrand X here with a video tutorial on dialing an optimal profile. In this example, we're going to use 320 mode on the Sega Genesis. So first thing I'm going to do is switch the input to RGB SCART, since that's what I'll be using with my console. And this brings up the Mega EverDrive Pro menu, but nothing has been dialed in, no optimal timing, no color calibration, so we're going to get started on that. First thing I want to do is load up the 240p test suite, because that just makes it so much easier to get it perfect. Go to test patterns, and for dialing in gain, I know there's an auto gain function that comes with the RetroTINK-4K, but it also lets you do it manually, and I just prefer that total control. So we use the white test pattern for RGB inputs. Go to advanced settings and go down to RGB/component ADC. And you can see down here we get a live feedback showing that the Rmax, Gmax, and Bmax are well below 255. And we want to raise the voltage until they match 255 on each channel. I'll do one pass. You can do like a few past the ticks and it still won't crush any colors or anything like that. So I like to go one pass just to make sure there's no flicker down to 254. That looks good for those two. There's a little bit of flicker on the blue channel, so I need to increase it more. So you see it doesn't match the same value as the other two channels, and you should never expect these channels to match up, and that's due to tolerance swings in resistors, for example. So don't worry about them not being the perfect same value on each. It's never really going to be that way unless by sheer luck. So let's go ahead and save out our progress. Save as current default RGB. Now I want to save as new, since this is a new profile I'm designing. All right, that's done. And then the next thing I want to do is start dialing in sampling and then, of course, phase. So I'm going to back out of this test pattern. And one I like to use is grid, 320 by 224, of course. You can, of course, set a separate profile for 256 mode. All right, so we want to go down here and we want to start dialing in our optimal timing. Now for the Sega Genesis 320 mode, the total lines, pixels per line is actually 427.6. Now you may be wondering, like, why isn't it just 320? Well, that's because the signal also includes horizontal blanking period for a total of 427.6 roughly pixels per line. So what we want to do is increase decimation factor to somewhere around there, but we also want to increase our samples per line so that will give us more breathing room when we go to dial in our phase to make sure there's no ghosting on pixels or anything like that. Basically, the more samples per line you have, the more breathing room you have on dialing in phase. So that's why I like to do this. You can go all the way up to 4095 samples per line, but obviously we need to do the math and make sure it matches 427.6 on the decimation factor. So we'll have to take that into account. So I'll go up to approximately 4,000 and then start dialing in decimation factor. There's 4,000. So now we increase decimation factor to get it back down to 427.6, roughly. Looks like 10 is going to be too much, so we'll have to work with 9 factors. And now we're going to lower this until we get back down to 427.6. A few ticks more. And 6. There we go. Now for decimation phase and subphase, you can use a checkerboard pattern, but I also include a zoom profile that allows you to see that easier. But before we're going to adjust that, we're just going to go ahead and save our progress. So back out, profiles, save as current, done. And now if we load my zoom profile, load from file, down here, and I have a zoom for 256 mode and 320 mode. So let's load the zoom 320 mode. And here we have a 20 by 20 zoom of the pixels where we can dial in phase. Back to advanced settings, go down to RGB component ADC again. And here from my zoom, you can see I've already dialed it in on this zoom for my setup. It may be different on yours, so it'd probably be, you know, if you go back to default of 1 with 0 degrees. You would basically work from here and you'd start studying the pixels to make sure that there's no ghosting. Like I'll give you an example. See how there's flicker and ghosting on the pixel edges? Well, obviously your coarse phase is not dialed in. And I found, at least on my setup, that decimation phase 4 of 9 is the rough estimate for dialing in phase. And then you go into subphase, and I found, at least on my setup, a maximum of 348.75 degrees dials in the phase, the subphase. So this is perfectly dialed in. So what you would do is you take these values, 4 of 9 and then 348.75 degrees, and you would plug those values into your profile that you're working on to dial in phase. So let's do that now. Go to Profiles and load the one I was currently working on, which was new profile number 2. Go to Advanced Settings and go back down to RGB component ADC. And now we're just going to use those same values, 4 of 9 and then 348.75 degrees. And there we go, perfect dialing in of phase. Should look nice and clean. But now we want to go ahead and get rid of that overscan area and just crop it down to the red parameter. So we're going to back out, go to Scaling and Cropping, and then we're going to just subtract the left trim until it butts it right up against the red boundary. Perfect. Now the right trim. Now the bottom trim, or top trim rather. And you see it's starting to go off screen at the top. So you don't know what's going on there and how you combat this. As I like to go to freeform scaling and just lower everything down as much as I need to see what's going on. And we'll dial that in later, but we just need enough to see what's going on here. So it looks like I need to go, what, one more? Oh, the wrong way. There we go, that's perfect. Now to do the bottom trim. And there we go, bottom trim, top trim, left trim, and right trim are now perfectly cropped out. And now we want to go ahead and dial in an integer scale for the purposes of this demonstration. So I'm going to go with 10x on both, since that's a pretty fun mode to use on Genesis 320 mode. There we go, the 10x vertical and now 10x horizontal. And now that's a perfectly integer scaled image for 320 mode. Now you notice down here there's interpolation for like when you're doing aspect correction. You can actually leave bilinear sharp active on both axes here. And that's because the RetroTINK-4K knows to disable bilinear sharp if it encounters an integer scale. So you don't have to worry about turning these off and saving the profile. You can leave them on pretty much all the time because, again, whenever it encounters an integer scale, it will know to disable them internally. So with that done, we can go ahead and save this profile. Save as current. And now you have a color calibrated, optimally timed, and cropped 10x overscan 320 image for the Sega Genesis. So let's back out and test this on an actual game. I'll go to my res sorted folder, and I include in my profile pack a text file showing which games are 256 mode main gameplay versus 320 mode main gameplay. We'll just load up Sonic the Hedgehog. And it should look pretty good. Sega! Nice and clean, perfect whites. Yeah, that looks really good. It looks like an emulator. Yeah, it looks really good. So yeah, no complaints here. Looks great. So next tutorial, I will discuss dialing and aspect correction, which does require a calculator and some math. And I'll also show how to dial in your sample rate if you don't know the documentation for the console. Like on the Genesis 320 mode, if you didn't know it was 427.6, I will show you how to find that out using the checkerboard pattern as usual. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.